posted up a really interesting article on stewardship and story that I know Luber has a huge amount of interest in story. And I thought a lot of parts of the article were really very interesting and substantial, in my opinion. So I enjoyed reading it. Clayton sent me a link to it, and I shared it over with Javier and Luber. So Clayton, thank you for joining us. And I'd love to hear just kind of give us an overview of the article, and then we'll just have a more discussion about it.
Yeah, thanks. This post was really inspired like by a previous post, but sort of they're related but not related. And it's all really trying to, you'd say, harmonize the whole concept of being an individual. Like, can you successfully individuate and like really be on your own? And I think you can, but by the time you succeed at that, you are no longer an individual. Like you have become like a small collective or like an extension of a collective. And so in this paper, that's sort of like what I'm trying to tease out. And it's really inspired like my own personal experiences, trying to sort of not be an individual within a family setting, and sort of try to actually learn to participate better. And I found that one of the models that worked best was like really the structure of a story. And it's like, if you think about it, through the structure of a story, it sort of makes more sense and is easier to work with. And so that's sort of like what I tease out. And in the articles that follow up to sort of like amplify some of the themes, I'm sort of trying to show how I kind of leave the position of kind of like going with my own set point and sort of like trying to integrate it with the larger story that's sort of happening around me, and integrate it in that sense, if that makes sense. So you'd say that's the whole progression in a nutshell. But yeah, like it's deepened my appreciation for story. So I kind of like see stories everywhere. Like it kind of feels like we are a nest of we're like a set of nested stories. Like you have different stories happening at different layers and across the layers, and it's like it's all trying to harmonize to sort of like create this very huge narrative that is beyond what we can even comprehend. It's like you could even push the claim to say that God is just like some really huge, complex story. But I don't want to claim that. I'll leave it at that.
Luber,
Yeah,
our screenwriter in the group. I wanted to have him riff on this first. So Luber, floor is yours.
yeah, I thought it was a really good, thought-provoking article. I have questions about the integration aspects of it, because I think that's when I think there's mysteries and question marks, because just alone based off what you're saying, the nested Russian dolls of stories at play, it's very complex in terms of, okay, how do you have a handle of that in such and such a case that you're able to integrate it intentionally? Like you're able to integrate a story intentionally. So like problems that I have, which we've talked about on this podcast, is every story has stakes. For me, the theme is what articulates the stakes. And the problem is, in a story, you have the stakes transparent. The stakes are transparent to a certain extent in the beginning, where it shows one side of the stakes enough, and then you don't really know the end. You don't really know the other side of the stakes until the end of the story. But the problem is for you, when the end of the story is you're dead, like in a very technical way. Now, of course, there's like, you could have, like, I have a dog. Hopefully, I outlive my dog, you know? And when my dog dies, you know, the story of my dog, in a certain sense, is over. And now, you know, you enter into the counterfactuality of reality in terms of the story of my dog, like me and my dog, only after the fact. So it's like, the first question I had, well, the two main questions is how do we integrate this story given that question of stakes and us not actually knowing the full stakes. And then the second part, which in your article, you're talking about there's three storytellers or storyifiers, as I think you put it. Why three? Not saying that's wrong. I'm just not sure. Like what? How come you demarcate basically a successful storyifying situation with three people? And maybe that's like a incorrect interpretation, so please correct me. But like, yeah, those are my two main questions for you. So yeah, so I'll pass back.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the part about trying to anticipate the stake, yet the stake can only be confirmed at the end. That's fun. That's sort of like the beauty of it. It's what makes it like really fantastic, because you have to accept that the other players or the other characters in this instance of the story also have like serious stakes, because it's so easy to dismiss their stake. It's kind of like, I see a thing here and I assume it has reached the satiation of its stakes. So I can decide what the stakes for it are. And just by making that decision, then I am choosing for it its stake. Like I'm assuming that it has no fight in this interaction. It's no longer taking ownership of its role in this story. Like my interaction, like even with the computer right now, like I have to accept that it has some stake. It's like, if my internet decides to go a different direction, that's not up to me. Like I can try, but I cannot wear up the internet in its depth of complexity. So I have to work with it. But this applies everywhere, like in everything. If the chair disagrees with you in terms of the project of the story you're telling, and the chair decides to go a different way, you are ending up on the floor. And it's as simple as that. Like the chair decided to go a different direction. And it's the same thing, like in interaction with humans, non-humans. You can't tell the stake, but you have to be respectful of the stake of the other character, because all the characters are trying to sustain their spot in reality. And no one's spot in reality is guaranteed unless they play well with the reality. And they only find out that they didn't play well when they lose the spot in the reality. So it's as simple as that, I would say. And why is it that you need at least three? For me, it's sort of like, it balances out. at that point. Like there's a backup of a backup. Now it can work with just one. There's always you'd say the one who carries the main story. Like there's always the strongest character, the one advocating for a path in this story that is larger and containing the other paths in a harmonious way that the others default to, but they need support. And without the support, it sort of starts to become tyrannical in a way. It just goes, in that dominant direction. And the moment it's dominant in that way, you have less participation and more following. And when it's more following, this is people sort of like, you'd say, deliberately accepting to not care about their stake and sort of like not being respectful of their own stake in submission to the lead character that they're following. And what that does is they lose touch of the story because they don't know what's going on. And you're seeing this with AIs, right? Like you submit your stakes to the AI, and the AI tool drives the story. And then at some point, something happens. And this is where your stake needs to come into play, because now it's hugely impacted. But you lost track because you submitted and you did not care for the progression of your stake and where it's going to end. And now you're at a point where you don't understand what's going on. And then now it becomes very fuzzy. So this whole, you'd say, advocate for having a human in the loop and kind of like keeping up with it does require that sort of submission. So I'm not saying you need 3 per se, but I'm saying the more, the better. But they all have to work harmoniously towards the same, what you'd call theme, Luber. Yeah.
I have my hand up. Luber, do you want to reply or do you want me to jump in?
You could jump in. You could jump in. I definitely have thoughts, but I want you to jump in.
Okay. Yeah. So I think for me, again, Clayton, what I really love about the article, I'm actually going to cite some lines from it, and I encourage everybody to go read the article to get the full context. So here's a couple of things that I want to I would share these lines and then share my reflection about it, and I want to hear your thoughts about it, Clayton. People who report empty lives are really short of values or beliefs. What they lack is a living participation in which meaning is made by them with others over time. A story is a structured account of someone's transformation in a dynamic situation, which also fairly describes sustained participation once it is put into words. The storifier's work is to keep that story and the participatory forms gathered around it alive and connected to its sources. At heart, it is the storifier's gift, finding the larger story in what another is only half saying and handing it back more whole than they could make it alone. Excuse me, sorry about that. And then I'll stop. There's a secondary thing I'm going to pause. So right there, what I'm hearing a lot is this idea of transformation in a dynamic situation, idea of participation, participatory relationship, and a connection to source. That's definitely an idea of wholeness and largeness. So my mind's kind of going a couple of things. I think one is the very first that is actually your conclusion. It's kind of your implication conclusion at the end of the essay. I brought right to the top because for me, I think this is something I'm very aligned with this idea that people have lots of meaning in their lives. Hilariously. Like in a sense, when we mean by that I have values and beliefs about the world, but they don't necessarily lead to belonging. I'm using Daniel's language. Like Daniel makes a difference between meaning and belonging. And that's So just to clarify my unmapping of understandings, that's how I'm seeing it, is that there's lots of meaning. People can say what things are and how they are in terms of whatever, take your accounts of the world, but it doesn't guarantee any sense of belonging, which for me, when I hear participation to the source, I sense that as belonging in terms of how to connect those concepts together. I think for me now, the other side is a relationship of wholeness to scale, right? So this is again why I'm very curious about this, because I know one of the tensions, because the last paragraph I was going to read was from Stephen Covey, which I assume was Seven Habits. I love that book. I think that book is widely underappreciated. How deep that book is. It's typically read as a corporate like self-help book, but I think that book has a lot of much more sophisticated ontology philosophy going on, and quite frankly, virtue ethics than people take for granted. I think, in my opinion. But I say that because the idea of integrative wholeness with a larger and larger scales, there's a tension because classically, one of the biggest problems of virtue ethics historically is to say, like, why do moderns generally poo-poo fit virtue ethics? Is to say that's really cute because you can do that for like one person or maybe a village of, what is it, 150 to maybe 3,000 people. Like we know that from Aristotle. Aristotle says the best cities about 3,000 people, like around there. Okay, then what do you do when you have orders of magnitude of scales of millions of people? And by the way, even in the United States, like one of our tension has been, it used to be the case where the reason why states were the organizing unit and there was no federal government the way we conceive of it today, post Civil War and post New Deal, was because the scale was so different. People took days to show up in different geographies. So as a result, the orders of scale, you oriented a social relationship, and let alone the ethical relationship, and let alone being good, and let alone virtue, which for Aristotelian perspective is for the sake of the beautiful. So the whole point is, how do we have participation belonging when the accounts that describe that about ground up, start with the unit individual and work your way up, how do we address that tension when we have basically technology and social orders of huge scales that go the other way? There's that issue. And that's kind of what, in my opinion, what Daniel's trying to do is mediate that tension in terms of how do we have belonging again now that we lost it because of technosocial capital of the atomized individual who in their basic relationship with desire has atomized and even though they have meaning, they have accounts of things, none of them are in an integrated participatory relationship.
Yeah.
What say you, Clayton?
Well, it's like I would say it's the whole, notion of the global pluralism, like Daniel likes to talk about. Like, just because we're saying it this way, it doesn't make it easy. Like, it's much more complex and much more sophisticated, especially because we all have different origins coming at this, and we're trying to harmonize them in all these different ways. So the larger the scale, the much more sophisticated it becomes. Like, we're like literally, you'd say, trying to get to the inner workings of, like a good biological habitat, per se. Like, all the way lining up from like the microorganisms to large creatures like, like trees, or you could even push it to rocks. People kind of like try to talk about rocks as a good example of non-living organisms, but in another way, you could say rocks are the ultimate adapters. Like they have figured out life to the point that they can't die, right? Like they have been more successful at being one with life that they cannot die because they have always been in a state that is almost dead. So like you could see it that way, but without pushing it too far in that direction, I would say we humans are sort of like, evolving in that direction. Like you think about it for a second, like you see the rocks, they're almost dead, right? Like they move but in a very slow way. It's a very slow change. You have trees which are more alive, but they don't leave their spots. Then you have like animals which they seem dumb, but more like their intellect is in harmony with whatever the environment is. And they don't think much because they're just trying to get along with the program. And as you keep walking along those lines, you come to us who are in disagreement with that larger story of whatever is happening around us. And we're going to set our own path in relation to it. And you can see how that story is playing out. But I would say now, when you push it to like things like technological beings, it becomes very interesting. But it's all devolving from like the harmony between that larger thing, that we're all participating in, and we are more on the other side of the more chaotic side, and these other creatures are in the less chaotic side of it. So it's all one continuum. So it's very complex. That's what I'm trying to say. Like it's super, super complex. And as assuming that we can just sort of like make some rules and they apply at scale, and this should just work, I think it's one of those largest assumptions. And I guess when those assumptions fail, that's where you see the breakdown, because we want to calculate it. We want to calculate it in one large way that applies holistically. But actually, each of those characters in this space of participation has real stakes, and they're going to fight for those stakes. And it's in not accounting for how they're going to fight for those stakes that it gets it breaks. It breaks at that point. Like all these models that have been proposed, they are all correct and true from the position of the proposer. But there is like an opposing model that they haven't considered because they were only in this position and they can only be in this position. Unfortunately, Leibniz is not correct. Like the whole monadic thing, I don't think it works. Like at least not in our realm. Like we have to interact. We have to participate. We can't participate in isolation. I don't think it works for our kinds of creatures and in this kind of reality.
Javier, what do you got?
Well, I mean, I was gonna jump real quick on this because I mean, Clayton, it's interesting because you started off by saying, can we individuate? Can we? And then by the time you do, you're probably not individual anymore. What's really interesting about this is like, for Hegel, individuation, you could argue, has actually more to do with determination than with being less confined by determinations. So an individual, we typically understand an individual as someone separate from the family, someone separate from society, someone that you can segregate out, abstract out from the mass, and say, this is an individual. But for Hegel, actually, the freedom proceeds kind of in this manner of surrender with more determination. So actually, to be a part of a family is to be a part of that increasing freedom and determination. And then what do you do when you gather a family? It's like, well, you start raising children. And then what do you do for your children? You try to raise your children to be free individuals in a society. So now you're raising them to be determined by society, right? So when you're talking about these greater stories, these kind of Russian doll stories, I look at it as we need greater and greater determinations as we go up the scale. But as you said, we have this contention point of pluralism. You know, whose pluralism are we going to buy into, right? Because that's really what you're raising at. And this is where it gets interesting, because it's almost like pluralism. When people try to think pluralism, they risk exactly what you're talking about, Clayton, which is they're not looking at it from the position in which they're speaking from. And then ironically, this is what Hegel calls an abstraction. Like, we are all willing to say what the stakes of the quote story is, but that's from the position of my own. And when I do that, I am not really, Hegel would call this an abstraction, because what you're doing is you're sucking out all the content, all the particularities of this, and then you're just sort of detaching everything else and just giving your own one-sided determination. So what we're dealing with is that we have a pluralism problem, and then we have a problem of, but we're trying to answer it with one-sided determination. And so your point on why do they need supporting characters? Why does the main character need a supporting characters? This is going to go back to a point that we on this podcast have constantly harped on, and that even Hegel harps on in the beginning of Philosophy of Right, is in order to begin an ethical life, you have to have love and friendship. And so ironically, to answer the problem of pluralism, and I'll be curious what Luber has to say and jockeying on them, is to establish this kind of foundation of friendship. Because I don't know how else you can even begin to get a survey of what this pluralism would even begin to look like. Because this is the greater determination that we're talking about. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, thanks. I'm in complete agreement. Like, you must appreciate the other and all those characters, because it's through that appreciation that it makes even your position more valid. Like, it's more real. And like you touched on the thing of like raising children. Yeah, they have to be individuals, but they also have to be members in the society. So they have to do both. Most of the time we sort of, like, it's easy, like in a conflict situation, to sort of like reduce and sort of like subtract like the larger part of it and kind of like deal with the immediate. And I guess like you have to do that because you're in a conflict situation, but you have to kind of like integrate it back in the larger, because if you don't, it reduces its realness. To start like a quick simple example is the whole Argentinian team's conduct at the World Cup. After the World Cup, it's like it was rebuked and looked at in a negative way, because it took away from the larger story of like, oh, we're getting together to celebrate this big thing for a few months, and you guys sort of like, you know, you poo-pooed it after you kind of like didn't win it, yet you're trying to win it for all those weeks. What are you trying to do, right? Like, you have to appreciate, even if it's not you, even if you're not the main character at the end, you still have to play your role in whatever way your stakes end. So yeah, like, I don't see another way it works.
Luber, let's get Luber a shot to reply, because I know he had replies he wanted to do, so I know he has to get out of here soon.
Yeah, guys, I just showed up at the dentist, so I can't really talk. But I have you in my ear if you guys want to keep going. I'm sorry.
That's all good. It happens. No, I think so. What Clayton's also talking about, one thing I want to point out to draw out more from is there's two aspects of this. I think one is from your article about, I'm going to quote more lines from it. So the role of the storifier is a function, not a rank. In a family, the storifiers are usually the parents, though only because the children are still too contained within the story to author much of their own. As they grow, they take on portions of the work, often unnoticed. In a team, it is the lead. the senior contributor or the operations person who frequently schedules the rituals. Everyone assumes we're always there. In friendship, it is whoever holds the group chat and remembers the birthdays. I think that's actually really interesting. Just I'm kind of riffing on Javier's points about basic Hegelian operations of politics of the family, the nation, and friendship. Is this relationship? One that caught my attention is the distributive quality of it, in the sense that it's in the relationship structure. There's a function activity of story. So it's not an artifact per se, it's an activity. I think that's actually the first thing caught my attention. And then even the aspect of it, of where you say rituals and things like, and even things like technology, like, and it is true in the sense of like, for example, the three of us, like what happened here with us was that we went to the Gardener's Stuffing Ground event last year. And then in preparation of it, we made a group chat, a group private message thing on Instagram, and then labeled the boys. And that became our vehicle to hold this friendship of philosophy that got more and more casual and more informal over time, eventually leading to a kind of generative activity to produce this, right? This little podcast, public-facing device of this. So I think that operation of, I think that even that example of the group chat caught my attention of an operation of technology, just in terms of your reply to the complexity of what we're talking about, scale and wholeness, is probably, I would imagine, something what Daniel would talk about as spread. I mean, I've not heard Daniel talk much about articulation of this distinction of spread versus scale, but I feel like what you're demonstrating in the article, what I just said out loud, as well as my commentary on it, is a demonstration of spread. Because in theory, technically, this is an example of it. This is a unity of a very small group of people who have a story, we're investigating an inquiry. One can make an argument also part of a story. I think you have a note about that mystery in the article, where we have a joint attention on a third thing we're all attuned to, that we're participating together in. And as opposed, it could be a private operation in terms of the private DM chat group on Instagram. And now it's happening here. We have a semi-public, private, public thing happening where this is being recorded and put it online. So I just want to share those notes. I'm just kind of chewing on what you reply back in this extra notes from the article.
Yeah, no, it's exactly that. It takes a life of its own, and my whole proposition is that, like, once it's it's like making a fire. It's like you make a little fire, and maybe there's two of you, but if the fire is, it keeps burning, it's gonna, and you guys have sort of like a small mini party-ish going on, it's just gonna grow because it's like a good time. Like, people want to be around something that's like that, and they may not want to actively start it on their own, but once it's going, they definitely want to be, you'd say, in that vibe, in that space. And it's like for many years, for me personally, like I was sort of trying to get away from it because, like, I just want to be on my computer, do my work, and so we need to go to someone's birthday. I'm like, what's in it for me? Like, I have lots of papers to work on and stuff to do. Like, there's my own research I want to do. Can you guys go? But then later I can't talk about it with them because I was not there. Like, I don't know what took place at the birthday. And slowly I started to realize, like, no, the invitation is, there's a little spark of a thing happening. And in this case, it's like a 2-year-old's birthday, but we're going to gather over there, and we don't know how that story is going to go. But if I show up, then I get to see how, those stakes sort of like play out. And then if something magical happened, then I can be a part of it, because it will continue its life when we come back home, where that party did not happen. Like, it happened at a different place. And so slowly it started to sort of like come together. It's like, oh, so there's all these threads happening, and it's about sort of like deepening those instances to give sort of like fan those flames a bit so they can sort of like amplify and be strong in whichever way that they're happening. and it's changed my whole perspective. Like for me, like it's everywhere now. Like I sort of dramatize everything in a strange way. My children will sort of like go. It's like, don't do that, Dad. Like it's no. You're doing that thing, but don't. Not in this situation, right? But for me, it's fun because it's like we can do it with anything now. It's like we can do it at dinner. We can do it in the car. We can do it on the way to school and back. Like we can do it all the time, and all the moments are just going to be deepened and deepened and deepened to the point whereby life just becomes so alive that you just want to keep doing it. Yeah.
I have some things I want to add, but Javi, I want to give you a shot first. If you have anything you want to talk about first.
Honestly, my mind went to this random experience of how people, they get frustrated with talking about the mundane. And I realized this, like, you don't have to be a philosopher. You don't have to be someone necessarily like intellectual, because you can like, for example, my girlfriend has told me that she really enjoys when we have our book clubs and we're able to really go into the novel, right? It doesn't, and it doesn't have to be, ironically, that deep, right? But what's interesting about it is when I say the mundane, I'm talking about the typical things we feel like we have to say in order to keep up the performative idea of the relationship. How's your day? What are you doing today? Where are you going? Oh, this happened at work, etc., etc. But when you're able to do something different, and it's interesting because parties, weddings, anything that breaks the cycle between work and rest, are those moments to have, ironically, really fulfilling conversations with people. And that's what it just made me think of, like, Clayton, where it's like, I think people don't realize that I think some people don't realize that they really enjoy this, and that when they're, quote, looking for meaning, for me, that it's right there. Like, it's the enjoyment is right there. There's because a lot of things can happen from that. And I think that's the main point. And I see your point on the nesting doll stories, because from that conversation alone, and just like Jockey gave the example of, we went to the stomping ground with Daniel's at Daniel's place. That's exactly how it went. We had conversations for hours. I mean, the 3 days just melted by. And then it started something new. But yeah, I'll leave there.
Clayton, you take the floor, and then I'll reply back.
Yeah, cool. No, thanks for sharing that. Just a little anecdote to share in relation to that. So, I started like this habit of curating the content that we consume, because I remembered when I was growing up, we didn't, like, the time I grew up, there wasn't too much media, and so so there wasn't much TV or much radio, and so we would listen to a lot of radio. And it's funny, like, we would listen to the radio ads, and there were all these jingles, and we would all remember them, and then we'd start teasing each other about them. Like, if I try to mimic this tune of a jingle, will you figure out what jingle I'm talking about? And so we make a game of it. But we had all those little games that I started to notice that we didn't have here, like me and my family. And I was wondering, why is that? And I found that it was because the kind of content we were consuming was it was of a broad variety. And so I was like, okay, we need to sort of harmonize it. And so I intentionally started to do this. Like, when we would watch a movie that has a musical, let's say you watch a Moana movie, then I would find the Moana music. And when we're in the car, I would play the Moana music, and sort of it would bring the Moana moment of the movie into the car. And so we deepen it. And now when that would happen, you'd see everybody respond differently and people break out in song because it's like, oh my God, it reminds me of that moment. And then now we start talking about the movie. Remember when they did this? And then someone remembers exactly the lines and we sort of replay the scene. And it's like the movie comes alive again in a different way. And it's the same thing. We started to listen to some audiobooks. And at first I thought maybe we need a whole wide variety. But then we listened to a few good ones and then the children keep asking for them again. It's like, can we listen to that other book again? It's like, but we've listened to it before. It's like, yeah, but we just want to listen to it. And now it's like we have these 5 books that we keep listening on repeat. And then when we're not listening to them, we're talking about these characters and teasing each other. It's like, oh, you're being like this other character in that book that does this at that moment. And then it becomes fuel for the conversation. And in a way, it brings the other parts of life alive in a different way that we didn't anticipate. But it's like without having intentionally put it in that moment in the car and sort of like lit that spark there to see what happens, like we would not have the future moment that happened. And I feel like what you're saying, Javier, it's pretty much the same. It's like the mundane is not dead. It's like it's alive, but we have to help it. Like we have to find it for it to become even more alive. And if we do that, it comes to life in a way that sort of like consumes us in a way that extends us later. So we come out more than how we were experiencing it. So it's not just. It's not dead to us and we're just, let's say observing it, but it makes us participate. And when we do that, it's a very different experience.
Actually, to build on that, I think your examples, Clayton, what you're pointing out is the relationship of art, right? Because there's the media of the movie, but then there's the music, and then bringing the music to the car injects basically using art as a coordination space of belonging. And I say that because, and I have a line here from you, a healthy collective leaves its members with more agency than it found, not less. The framework asks a person to connect to a larger source, not to vanish into it. So basically the whole point is that by operation of recollectional thought, which is actually a kind of participation. So when we say participation, I'm actually would argue it's something like recollectional memory, in the sense of you're eliciting the encounter of the art again in a new space, the recalling of it, right? And that gives an opportunity for participation. Everyone basically of their reminders. Oh, you're acting like this person, right, from the movie in this new context and situation. So I think that's actually really interesting in the sense that it gives an articulation of how I just opened before that storytelling doesn't necessarily require a product per se. It's a functional activity within the system, but it does have products in terms of those objects or externalized objects do have effects. And one of those effects is a coordination mechanism of joint attention in a place of belonging. I think that elicits more agents when it's healthy, elicits more agencies of the individuals inside. And it seems like the agency in question is recollective participation.
Yes, it totally is, and the recollective, you'd say, participation puts us at gives us the beat. It's kind of like the drama in the band, giving us the right timing of how we should continue to participate with the unfolding reality around us, because sometimes we get sucked in and we forget the correct rate at which we should be engaging and how to position ourselves. But someone needs to be watching. Like if you're a parent to a child, like this is easy. You kind of like, you'll even physically hold them back and say, don't do that, or maybe not too fast, or maybe you sort of like moderate them. But you also need to be moderated because you don't know when you're going over the line. And so in a case where you're overdoing it and you make, let's say, the child lose their agency to moderate you back, then it just becomes one way. Then you become the main owner of the moderation, but then you can't moderate yourself because you don't really know when you're crossing the line and when you're crashing them. You just think you're always right. And that sort of like breaks it. That's why you need the supporting characters to kind of like put you back at the correct rate when you're out of sync. And so like making that into a larger theme that allows all the participants to sort of like be able to tweak it and sort of like push back and say, no, it has to be this way. And even borrow something larger that you all submit to. I feel like that is the appropriate way. Like it helps, at least one appropriate way that sort of like helps to keep that harmony and balance.
Javier, you want to riff or you want me to jump in
Yeah.
another one?
Yeah, I had some thoughts going, but yeah, I mean, again, what stood out to me is I like this move, Clayton, of disappointing characters. That we need disappointing characters. It's always interesting because you never know. You never know if you're going to be the disappointing character for other people. And I always find that fascinating because when you are, for you, it's like, I'm not being disappointing. I'm just being different. You know, I just disagree with someone's perspective or, you know, someone's outlook on life. I mean, this is something that I learned when I got older with my mother, which was, my mother is giving me advice about things, but then I realized I can't even, I can't relate to the advice because I don't agree with the fundamental values and principles in which that advice depends on. You know, it's kind of like when my father used to give me like stock tips, right? You know, oh, this is how you should buy a stock. This is how you should do this. But that assumes that I care about stocks. You know, that assumes that I actually would agree to listen to something about stocks. And so in some sense, I remember one day he told me, why aren't you interested in this? Why aren't you interested in what I'm interested in? As he kind of did it as a joke, but I could feel the quasi seriousness from it, of like this kind of curiosity of like, why aren't you interested in what I'm interested in? And I do imagine as a parent, there is a frustration about why is the child not interested in some of the things that you're interested in? And they seem so reverse to it. But you could almost use the disappointing character, like you're saying, as the I don't know what to call it, like the way to figure out the boundaries, like you're almost setting up, right? Because it wouldn't be a clear boundary, because it's possible maybe, you know, maybe there is some, maybe they're mistaken, you know, maybe there's some things that need to be worked out. But nevertheless, because there is a difference, because there's a disappointing character going on, it does raise this question for the characters themselves about, is there a possibility that there's another way of looking at this? There's another way to approach this. At the very least, it calls us to understand why the person is the way that they are. And then from that point of view, I don't know if Daniel means this by spread versus scale, but I feel like mutual understanding, or at least the attempt of mutual understanding, to me sounds like spread. but I could be wrong. I don't exactly recall correctly how Daniel uses this term.
Clayton, you can reply if you like, or I can jump into something else. I can jump in? Okay. So actually, on building what Javier is saying, I actually want to draw out some other again, I feel like my job today is to draw out from the article, which again, I encourage everybody to read. Actually related to the unhealthy dynamic, where this is the section I'm pulling from it, because I think it relates to this idea of difference in the group and how that gets mediated through storytelling. Reality suppression hardens a group's mythology against the evidence, so that whoever notices the gap is made to feel they are the problem. An inherited shame, the oldest pattern, carries forward the self-erasure of an earlier generation suffered and dresses it as fidelity. Once a member feels before they can name it, the sense that they must choose between their own perception and their belonging. Healthy collectives ask for no such choice. The presence of the choice itself is a diagnosis. Now, I think that's very important, because when parents feel like there are things that, like, for example, Javier is giving notes of like different value systems of priority, right? Wealth, basically, like you should be interested in stocks because you should be saving for your retirement. Well, maybe Javier is not ready for that acknowledgement or interested in that at that moment. So there's an issue of interest of priority, right? Perception in that sense. But there's also things like sexual orientation or having children or religious doctrine, religious position, where those drive at not necessarily, like, those are first principle differences that cause people to feel that that is a danger to the entity, that the collective is now in danger, that to allow for that kind of gap would cause a rupture. So that's part of it. But what your article is pointing out, once a person feels that, even senses that they have to make a call of disclosure, that either destroys the relationship or basically destroys the relationship or discloses what they perceive, that shows that something's wrong with the collective. But in terms of like a distinction, and I appreciate actually throughout the article, you're using actually a concept of health, which I'm very sympathetic about, which is it's an ontological health, right? Which is basically the idea of fittingness or correspond as a mediation of variance and difference within a unity that holds together to produce the activity in which its telos is oriented towards. And in the telos of organization, of collective, in the sense you're talking about, is generating belonging, right? As we talked through. So I love to hear your kind of reflection back on these 2 points from me and Javier.
Yeah. No, it's exactly that. Like, most of the time we have all these, you'd say, boundaries we've set, all the taboos, right? Like, we've set them as societies, as cultures, for reasons. Like, they're protecting a certain version of that culture, a certain version of that tradition that we think it's like, I think this works well, so let's keep it. Let's repeat it, right? But the variation in the generations essentially has to extend it, but it's not going to extend it without challenging it. And when it's challenged, we sort of we take a bit. We think it's being dismissed, like it's being made incorrect, and made feel that way. Like it may even be incorrect. Like someone else has come in with a different perspective that shows the gaps in it. But because we're so subscribed to it, our instinct is to defend and protect. And so we have, since it's the larger group and they're less, it's kind of like it pushes at them. And I think that is sort of a missed opportunity. Like, if it's going to work well, like any structure, it should account for this. It should be able to harmonize the difference that emerges from within this collective. So if a child comes back home and they have a whole different structure, let's say, to take the example of sexual orientation, and they decide for them, not even decide, I don't think they decide, like they find out that their individual desire is not the same as what they have been taught while growing up, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. Like this as a structure, the structure is differentiating. Like it's a, hey, he's back. You know? Yeah, the structure is differentiating, and this is okay. This is welcome. It's more like now to try and understand how does this structure work with this extension, and what does it mean for the structure? Like how can we help? And I think like in the West, there's this approach you'd say like at a political level, like you see this continuous accommodation, which is you'd say why the West is synonymous with freedom. Like everybody believes there's freedom in the West, especially in the United States, because this has been demonstrated as the approach. Like the democratic process sort of goes in that direction. It's like, okay, let's not dismiss, let's try and integrate. Mostly. Let's not talk about the times when it doesn't go that way. But that's the whole point. It's like the integration has to be continuous so that it's not dismissing all these variations that are emerging, because if you integrate them, then they strengthen the collective and they make it broader and accommodating for everyone. Because like there's going to be members who may have been suppressed by the structure before because there was no opportunity. But now someone has spoken up strongly and there will be argument. And so it shouldn't be suppressed. It should be incorporated in a way. And if it's not being incorporated, then there's problems. There's definitely problems. There's work to be done for that collective. Mr. Luber has something.
Yeah, Luber, jump in. I'm glad your teeth are nice and clean now. So please, Luber, jump in.
Yes. Yeah, so I think I was listening the whole time. My apologies for not being able to contribute. I think one of the issues is, I think like theme, and it's something that people can fall back to that creates a space of harmonization while maintaining difference. But in that sense, it helps you know what to focus on, what's salient, what's not salient, so to speak. But it doesn't necessarily help you how you're supposed to feel when you're focused on the thematic content or the appropriate focus. It doesn't help you on. That is the problem. The problem is desire in this respect, because you could desire the right things, but even how you feel when desiring those things, there's so many possibilities on how you feel when you are desiring the thematic thing, let's say. And that, is very difficult to kind of systematize in a way, because when you're editing, and like we've talked about, like edifying your life and like friendship, when you have loved ones or you have a friend, you are essentially editing your life. Like you'll tell someone, don't talk to me like this, it hurts my feelings. Like you're constantly editing when you have friends or a loved one. So when you're in that process of editing, how are you supposed to feel when you are editing or desiring or focusing on the right thing? It's like, oh, the focus here in this situation is how my child is being courageous. Let's say he's being that's the focus, and that that makes sense thematically too. Let's say you're able to delimit, you know, all the different existential focuses, and it's like, okay, this one's actually the most appropriate fitting one. Well, there's a lot of different ways on how you feel once you are focused on the courageousness, and that is a question. That is a question mark, because like me and my writing partners, we're totally on the same page in terms of theme and its structure, and we can go into unbelievable depth about the structure. But then when we're picking music and we're trying to figure out music in a scene, well, there's the difference between, like last night we were talking about the difference between if the character should be more pensive feeling or if it's more like solemn. You know, like there's these finer distinctions on how you feel when you know what to desire. And that I think, you know, the irony is the West is supposed to be free, the place of freedom, but yet there's no determinations in anything that the West is doing. You know, there's nothing. You don't need family, you don't need this. Like the whole force of necessity is being gradually removed from what's appropriate in America, really. And that makes it harder to desire the right things, which then makes it even harder to even figure out how to feel what's the right feeling when desiring the right things. So it's a mess. It really is a mess. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. Clayton,
Yeah, I'll-
Clayton or Jock. Go ahead, Jock. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll jump. I just want to actually, so on the note about that, I talked about it a little bit in the last reply to you, Clayton, but I want to emphasize a little bit more. So an area of interest that this group has a lot of interest in is shame as the contrary to the beautiful, because in ancient Greek, that was the specific distinction. It's not ugliness, it's shame. That's the ugliness to beauty. So the reason why I want to share this note from you, and you mentioned it twice in the article. I brought up the first one. I'll repeat it and then connect where you talk about it again later in the article. An inherited shame, the oldest pattern, carries forward the self-erasure an early generation suffered and dresses it as fidelity. Then you go on further to say, inherited proverbs are deployed to shut down a fair complaint by dressing it in the authority of the ancestors. Refusal hardens into a punishing taboo. At the larger scale, it is the old rule that shamed left-handed children into writing with a hand that was not theirs, a purity that protected nothing and cost much. In a family, it is the silent treatment, the subject that can never be raised, the secret everyone is made to protect. So I find that really interesting, both in terms of that use of shame, which in the model you're presenting is the shutting down of agency of the entity, of the subject, right? So that's a very interesting pickup right there. And then the operation of difference in relationship to shame. I think those theories caught my attention a lot. They kind of build on what Luber's talking about. Clayton, the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, it's the shame gets kind of like commandeered to sort of like strengthen a position, to win a position. It's sort of like politicized. And, you know, even building on what Luber was saying, it's like when it's pushed to the end, you have all these gaps, like it really breaks down the meaning, right? Because it's being used as a suppression technique. And going back to my initial proposition that like each of these characters has stakes and they do have a reality to fight for. And this move of sort of like using like shame and you know, like any piece of power to suppress them is sort of doing that. It's invalidating their sporting reality. And by invalidating their sporting reality, you're breaking the whole structure of the larger theme. And this is how, like you'd say, it devolves from the meaning it should be making. So the inverse of that is to kind of like appreciate that they're not mistaken. Like it's like to sort of like strengthen their position for them. It's like, yes, maybe they're coming from a position that we do not fully appreciate. But if we understand why they feel like it fits, maybe we can come to a common place whereby we can make it work. Like if it's a familiar situation, you always like have to expect that there's some love there. Like it's the correct assumption to have in a family that the member who is raising something that seems unwanted or ugly still has love for the family and is doing it out of love. It does not feel that way in the moment. I would say, like Luber's pointed out, like it doesn't tell you how to feel because it's conflicting and it's challenging. But we can be sure that they did not lose their love because we gave it to them as an entity. Like for example, if a child is acting in a way that makes us feel like maybe they hate us, our conclusion that maybe they hate us is not correct because we met them with love and have trained them in a loving way. Like we have put so much love in them that if we conclude that they hate us, that we are doubting our own selves. Like we're being hypocritical of all the loving we have done for them. So we need not to be hypocritical of it. We need to kind of like be confident that the loving we have invested in cultivating this member is there, even if they seem to be behaving in a way that makes us feel like maybe they lost it, right? And look, but that applies in that situation. Like going back to let's say the situation of a work colleague or a political situation, this is more tricky because then it boils down to the caring, right? Like it's like, what should you care about? How much should you care? And maybe in that situation that like you may not have like that kind of loving scenario, like that kind of like loving grounding to draw upon, but you can still care about their humanness, even like their being there, like the willingness to participate, like that should be grounding enough for you to not dismiss them in entirety. Because sometimes when we're pushing for our positions, we do tend to kind of like go to those extremes, and you'll see it like in crazy debate arguments, and people will say outrageous things that I haven't thought through, like these really huge claims that sort of like invalidate the other position without appreciating it. And so for me, the whole point I'm driving towards there is whichever way it presents itself, like it's more coming with a challenge rather than you'd say a dismissal, because we always easily interpret it as a dismissal as opposed to a challenge. And it's hard to think about it as a challenge because in the moment you're really feeling like you're being dismissed, right? Just to put that aside and think of it as being challenged to raise up to the occasion. Yeah, you'd say it's hard for us in different ways, and it takes practice, I guess. Like over time, like even me personally, like I've only gotten better like over time, but it was never easy at the start.
Jocket, I don't know if you have to get off at 9. If not, I definitely have some responses. Okay, well, LeBron James is going to the Sixers. Okay, now I bring this up because I'm very excited. Okay, but a lot of other people that like other teams are not excited about that. Like the Miami Heat, for example, right? And it's like, it's kind of funny, like when I'm making a movie and like I'm trying to figure out what the music is, and I have to be on the same page with two other people. It's like once we figure it out, we all hear the same music in our head, right? And I wonder if all the Philadelphia 76ers fans have all the same music in their head right now with LeBron James, you know? And then you have like the Miami Heat people, for example, where it's like they also have all the same music, the same feeling, but it's just totally different, right? It's like probably like dun dun dun, something like that. I'm being like on the nose cheeky, but the point is like these impasses are there, going off of like Javier and like Hegel. It's like these impasses are there because there's these determinations that are made, and how the virtuous person would say stick with your determination and stick with the tension of the other's determination, meaning, okay, I instead of me like exiting the situation, I'm actually gonna stay in it and like talk to the Sixers fan and be like, fuck you, and like stay in it, right? Um, and the question of the political, I think, is not compatible with the question of how to stay in it, because the question of the political is how do you transform the position that you're in, so insofar as everybody can collectively transform the positions that they're in and be in the same capitalistic position, be in the same communistic position. The whole concept of the political seems to completely obliterate difference in the respect of, in the NBA, you got different fandoms, you got different groups, and there it's like the very, if I were to use political in this respect, the very politics of being an NBA fan is precisely to have your own determination and to hate the other. Like it's literally part of it. But like in society, when we talk about politics, we can't intentionally be like, yeah, be a Democrat, but hate the Republicans. Like it's not like that. It's like you're a Democrat because the Republicans are wrong. They're like they're really wrong, and it's like, okay, we need to transform everybody into a more liberal democratic mindset, and that gets rid of the hate and the difference that seems to be needed in actually kind of habituating a space of friendship, because it seems like the 76ers fans, they're all friends with each other. You know, you see someone wearing that hat, an Eagles hat, or even football, you know, oh, you're like, I'm in LA, you know, I'm wearing an Eagles or a Sixers thing, and someone will be like, oh, you're from Philly? I'm from Philly. I'm a Sixers fan. And it's immediate, like, friendship connection instantly, right? When you hear, like, oh, I'm a Democrat in LA, and then someone else is like, yeah, I'm a liberal too. You're like, right, of course. Like it's not like you don't get that like tension of like friendship. There, like it holds a totally different feeling. And my point is like the feel, how you're supposed to feel when desiring something thematic. It has to do with theme, but there's also this pre-thematic thing. It's proto-thematic, and this is where it has to do with the beautiful. It's like all the Sixers fans, they see some beautiful vision with the Sixers. It's like trust the process, and B, there's this goal, there's this vision. I'm preparing, and it's so funny because you could throw all of Daniel's language in it. It's like everyone's collectively preparing for a championship, right? The vision of the process actually working out, and everyone's like sticking with it, and like all of our expectations have been completely been fucked with. We thought it was going to be with Ben Simmons, then it wasn't with Ben Simmons, and it's like the roster keeps changing and Embiid's health, and it's like a roller coaster, and it's like every expectation we've had has failed, and yet it's still there. Like the process is still there, and it's the vision is still there. But like now it's with LeBron James. It's like never in a million years would anyone think that. So I definitely think approaching it in terms of scale might not even be correct, because the presupposition to it is like, okay, it's like the problem is scale, and it's like how do you get into the politics, and it's like there's presuppositions in what that means, and I think we have to kind of peel back the onion a little bit and figure out what about the political, what premise can we mess with where it's actually not about politics, it's something else. And I definitely think a neologism is going to be appropriate here, because I think it's going to be something other than politics, and it's going to have to be something like friendship, but also something that's encompassing a bigger space than friendship. Because the Sixers fandom, it's a bigger space. There's like there's like, let's just say there's 2 million Sixers fans in the world, 3 million Sixers fans, right? There's no way I'm actually friends with all of them, but like if I were to meet one, there's an immediate bond, and I want to use that word on purpose, bond, when you meet another Sixers fan. And it's like there's something with the space of the NBA or like sports where it's not quite like politics. It's like teetering on politics, but it's not politics, because it produces a bond that's different than what the political realm produces. And I am going to pass it off now. I think Javier has his hand up first.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
You're good.
So yeah, Luber's provocation here. Which I always love. Okay, so yeah, I mean I agree with this idea of like politics and scale buys into this presupposition. And then when you compare it to sports, which I do like that analogy, ironically, there seems to be something like more honest about the sports idea. Because recently I've also been getting into and Luber and Jockey know about my kind of like research, but also like I just enjoy it. I've been getting into like One Piece collecting cards, right? But it's a whole community. And it's exactly how Luber's describing it, where everybody has this shared vision. And there's like an immediate bond if you're a One Piece fan, like, you know, or if you just got into it, it's an immediate bond. And to compare this to politics, it's interesting because I could be a One Piece fan and have a completely different politics. And this is interesting because it's almost like when we talk about bridging perspectives, it's almost like when we talk about the political perspective with each other, it's like the wrong way to approach it. Because when I'm in school, for example, which I'm heading to now, when I'm in school, I encounter so many people, but our shared vision is to pass this program. And so there's like an immediate bond, you know, we're suffering through the homework, we're suffering through all these things. But what it allows, and this is what I think is interesting, comparing the political to every other type of bond is possible, is that it seems when we provoke other kinds of bonds in the social space, we're able to get in to a political space where we can possibly have a political conversation without it necessarily breaking the whole bond. Now, I'm not going to say it's not going to be challenging. I mean, it's definitely going to be challenging. But what's interesting is like you already have an in. Whereas if I began the conversation and I said, I'm a liberal and I'm going to talk to a Republican, you know, it already raises this sharp distinction. And I really like what you said, Clayton, about we need to redescribe losing conversations as being challenged. Because I noticed that's something that is a big hiccup in people having conversations. Because when people have conversations about difficult things, how they view it is, I risk losing my perspective. I risk losing. And that's the stakes, right? Like any difficult conversation, the stakes is, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? But what I like about redescription or the act of redescribing is, why are we buying into the presupposition that when we have a conversation, it's about winning and losing? Why is that the only option? Versus, I could simply gain understanding. And that's the bare minimum. I gain understanding. Why is it that I feel like I'm losing something if I'm being challenged? I like this word. You know, I like this word, Clayton. You know, you reminded me like when I was a kid and my teacher would correct me and I would say, this is really hard. And she would say, no, it's not hard. It's challenging. She constantly said that to me. It's challenging. Something that always stuck with me. But it was this active redescription of I'm being tested, right? I'm being tested. I'm being thrown against something. But most people want to leave this avenue. But what I'm trying to say is that when we have a different bond that's not directly political, I think this poses a very interesting condition or environmental condition, I don't know what to call it, where I have an in and I don't feel like maybe I have something to lose because we have a bond that is not directly political, still kind of holding us together. And that's something that like Luber kind of made me think about. And that's why I think when people dismiss this idea of friendship as something separate from the political space, I look at it as you can't actually access the political space directly. Like, I don't think it's going to work. It's not going to work because what it's going to be, it's going to be a debate. It's not going to be a conversation. It's going to be a debate because we've already identified our bonds in front of each other. I'm Democrat, you're Republican. But if we get interested in the different kinds of bonds that are possible, what if we then had political conversations? That's an interesting framework because now it's like, oh, he's a Republican, but he loves One Piece. You know what I mean? Like, you know, he's like, but he loves One Piece. I don't know. All right, that's enough for me.
Okay, and because I have a hard stop on my part, I want to give Clayton an opportunity to have the last word. So I'm going to yield most of my comment. The only thing I will add is I actually think what Javier and Luber are drawing out, this idea of I always think I love this. Luber appreciate it. This amphetamine premise. There's always these unspoken models behind the discourse, or the organization, or the collective that sets the tone and orients what is going on here. And what I'm hearing is the idea that the political space, it's a winner take all. It's zero sum. There's a winner or a loser, and you don't want to be a loser. You need to be a winner. Well, there's lots of spaces that can play in. So actually, if everyone's assumption is to be political is to have that zero-sum attitude or orientation, then that means the political actually applies across the whole board under that definition. You can have family relationships that are political. You can have corporate environments that are political. When it's about demarcation of territory, and to yield position is to lose, and to lose is to destroy. So, and you get nothing. You get stuff taken from you, right? Which is very different from basically not zero sum, but basically genitive. That in the activity, as Javier pointed out, what have you got understanding? Or actually, in the case of, quite frankly, in competition and sport, same thing applies. Technically, it seems like a zero sum because there's a winning team and a losing team, but it's also every sport. We'll talk about this. There's always cases of examples with games or competitions where the loser won or both won, because there was a beauty that came out of the contest that generated something to be witnessed and remembered, even if someone won and lost. In boxing, there's a bunch of, my mind's blanking on the game, on the match. There's a trilogy of Nicky Ward and another boxer, I forgot the name, I'm blanking on it. But basically that trilogy was a case where it was a competition, but because the contest was a certain mode of activity, even if there was a winner and a loser, it was beautiful, right? So it went beyond the zero sumness. One can make an argument actually in terms of even natural systems, in terms of, because of predatory consumption, we must destroy something else to create life, like to sustain life. But what life does, it generates new complexity from the consumption of calories and energy. So it's not just entropy of basically more of removal of order, it generates of new complexity, right? That actually gives order to it. Basically, things like anything of rationality or logos, for example, would be that way. So I just want to share a note of, I think a distinction is drawing out, which I thought was very useful, is the amphetamine premise of winner-take-all markets or dynamics versus the generative activity of the beautiful that arises a new possibility. I think that's actually a very nice kind of drawing out I'm hearing from everybody. But Clayton, the floor is yours. You can leave last notes.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, and it's really wonderful to talk through all of these different themes with all of you. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully maybe in the future we can have some more of this. Yeah, it's just to sort of like try and bring together some of the things we've all just touched just then. It's like my son plays basketball. I mean, he's only like what, 11, so it's not competitive pro basketball, but it is competitive pro for him. And this evening they had a game with it was like a derby almost, like they're the top two teams, but it turns out most of his team couldn't turn up. Like there were only 5 players and they had to play all 4 quarters, so they were gonna lose. Like we saw their bench, we saw the other team, they had 8 players. Our team is 5. Yeah, we knew what was gonna happen because it's a very good team. But they played their hardest. Like they had less fouls. They kept the point difference below 15 points. It's like, to us, it's like, you guys won. It's like, you didn't have any subs. At one point, one player goes down, and you still showed up and you still competed. And even at the end of the game, the other team congratulated them for keeping up because they were so outpowered in this game specifically. But they exhibited like really good basketball and really good ethics that everyone was cheering for them. Like even if they lost the game, everyone was happy how they kind of like turned out. And I think every now and then such an ethic gets teased out, but it's very hard to sort of like get to that place before walking through, the surface level interaction, kind of like that quick bond of like, oh, you like this team, I like this team, and so we should be in deep relationship. I mean that starts off that way. It's potential for a deep relationship, but the more you get into the personal, then you start to build on the layers. But at least you have that thing that holds you. And even then, like Javier pointed out, when you get into conflict and there's a huge difference, you still remember that, oh, we all like the same club. And so maybe you're not all bad like right now. Like you might be as challenging me in such a way that makes me feel like I should other you, but I can't other you because we have this other bond. And so you sort of like that other bond brings you back. And like I find that similar to me, like even, being married for a long time, you get to the season of your marriage where it's like an aporia of sorts, whereby you don't need to talk about much. Like most things are automated, right? So every time you have a conversation, it's about something new, but there's not many new things that happen. And so most conversations are mundane. But it does not mean that things are bad or anything. It's just that your lives have been melded together over a long period of time, that there's less surprise in the participation. But people sometimes misinterpret that and go like, we think it's dying. And you're like, I mean, you could see it that way, but I don't think so. Like it's pretty much alive if you kind of like look into the mundane. And so looking into all those bigger containers that are holding us together, I think that is where the source of meaning is. And I guess it's the same reason like we had religious, traditions and all these big tribal organizations. They're all trying to solve the same problem. Yes, we've probably moved on from those now, but we still need to solve that problem. And in that paper, I'm proposing that it's in the solution is there. Like we just need to look a little bit and just shift our position in terms of how we are approaching it, and we will reconnect to that meaning. So thank you guys for having me.
That's a pleasure. Everybody, check out Clayton's article. It's a fun time. And thanks you for watching.